This, of course, as a result of that lady you are referring to, the 18-year-old JMM, and that case was being ruled on yesterday. Judges order return of guidelines on safely terminating pregnancies in health facilities as well. So that abortion story taking up quite, a lot of space in newspapers today, being an issue of national concern. The Standard as well on education curriculum, no details yet on junior secondary schools. This, of course, coming at a time when we are implementing the CBC, competency-based curriculum, and whether it should be anchored in primary schools or in secondary schools and all of that. Those were discussed in Mombasa, where the conference has been happening, of course, attended by the CS for Education, Professor George Magoha as well. It is not clear. Or first KICD boss, Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, says only Education CS can explain whether it will be anchored in primary or secondary schools, is the line there by the Standard. It's not clear yet whether junior secondary school will be anchored in primary or secondary schools in the ongoing implementation of this new curriculum. Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development Director Julius Juan caused more confusion on the matter yesterday when he said only the Cabinet Secretary could address the issue being raised by secondary school heads. A bit of clarity still needed as regards that. Of course, coming at a time when there's a stalemate between the Kenya National Union of Teachers and the Education Ministry and the Teachers Service Commission. 280 teachers have been interdicted by TSC for failing to comply with the directive to have, teachers trained on CBC. TSC set to hire 8,000 teachers. Now the numbers here are different. Standard says 8,000. The Daily Nation says 3,000 teachers to be hired by government. Maybe it's across the timelines where the difference is. The government has set aside 3.2 billion shillings to hire 8,000 teachers this year to address the shortage of teachers in schools. Counties face cash crisis as MPs, senators differ on bail. This has been a very, very serious story, in the last 2 months or so, where we've had the National Assembly and the Senate disagreeing on how much money should be dispersed to the counties. The National Assembly saying 316 billion and the Senate saying 327 billion. This, of course, has even affected the budget reading today because the MPs and the senators yesterday, especially the senators, were talking about not allowing Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich to go on with the budget reading without a resolution on this matter as well. But that really does not seem to be Treasury's problem because there's a timeline within which that budget report has to be issued. And of course, it cannot be stopped because the National Assembly and the Senate cannot agree on how much money should be disbursed to countries. Rotich to raid your pockets to finance 3 trillion shilling budget. Again, we expect a lot of taxes being introduced on items and commodities as well, just to make sure government gets the money it needs to run its functions of development, and of course discussions around how much we are spending on recurrent expenditure as well. Big win for small suppliers, a state to finally pay up. This, of course, as a directive from the President during the Madaraka Day celebrations. Government suppliers owed less than 10 million will get their dues before the end of the month, according to the National Treasury. The PS there, Dr. Kamal Thuge, says the government had set aside 10 billion to clear supplier debts owed to disabled women and youth under the Access Government Procurement Opportunities. That's AGPO as well. So some good news for suppliers who are owed 10 million shillings and less. Tax and Big Four, how state missed the target. Last year, we did see in the budget statement by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, a lot of allocation and money was directed towards the Big Four pet project of President Uhuru Kenyatta, really, and we expect that that will continue today as the President nears the end of his second term and effectively the end of his presidency. It's something he's passionate about, the Big Four, manufacturing, food, and as well urban development and housing, among the issues that he's spoken about, and the universal health coverage as well. The Star, how Rotich plans to spend your money. Still about budget, very big today. According to estimates, the three arms of government have been allocated 2.45 trillion. All right, so we'll also be discussing the sharing of that money as well. Court gives room for safe abortion. Kenya on high alert after Ebola deaths in Uganda. That was one case that we spoke about there. And down here, defiler to spend life in prison after appealing 21-year jail term, and senators and CRA failed to agree on the new revenue formula. That as well is a big story that, like I mentioned earlier, is dominating headlines because of the fact that that stalemate has dragged on for a while, and we are worrying about how much then in the end will be allocated to counties. We expect to hear a bit or something alluding to that in the budget statement today. Share resources, peace efforts to end Pokot, Karamojong border clashes as well in the Star. Some abortions legal, say judges in landmark ruling regarding that ruling that I was talking about earlier that was done yesterday at the High Court. Governor Obado here says that anti-graft war is malicious. There have been talks and discussions around whether the fight against corruption is targeting specific individuals, and Governor Obado actually agrees that it is. Waiguru faces a demo by Ngirishi's husband. This is a push and pull in Kirinyaga County between the governor and the woman representative there as well. Kenya on high alert after Ebola outbreak in Uganda. One case reported, a 5-year-old boy who reported to have died yesterday. And then page 4 of the Star, how Treasury CS Rotich plans to spend your money, being the headline there. So how that money will be collected, 3.02 trillion shillings, and how it's going to be spent is dominating a lot of the newspaper coverage today as well. The Business Daily, this should be their forte, so to speak. So Rotich targets tax cheats to fund 3.1 trillion budget. Tax cheats, all right? Those who've not been paying tax, making billions and billions of shillings and not paying tax. We've seen a lot of cases in that. Of course, also the raid at Kenya Revenue Authority, the fact that some of these people are being aided by KRA officials to not pay tax, to cheat when it comes to payment of taxes, and therefore the government is losing a lot of money in that as well. Bank salaries to go up by 1 billion shillings. The wage bill will shoot up by 1 billion in the first quarter of this year compared to a similar period last year, with analysts saying that the benefit of job cuts and branch closures common in the sector recently is wearing off. And Matiang'i orders the deportation of Chinese traders. The Business Daily did talk about Chinese in Gikomba. I'm sure you saw that at some point. So CS for Interior and Coordination of National Government, Matiang'i, is now ordering for the deportation of Chinese traders, perhaps the ones who are not licensed or do not have work permits. Interior CS Fred Matiang'i has ordered the Immigration Department to deport foreigners engaged in small-scale trading 2 days after an exclusive Business Daily story revealed the presence of Chinese merchants in Kenya's biggest second-hand clothes market. That's Gikomba as well. They're coming, and they're coming in big, doing every single thing they can. House Centum plans to spend 19.5 billion shillings from Coke stake sale. There's a business story there on Business Daily. And Kenya starts traveler screening as Ebola spreads to Uganda as a reaction to that case that was reported in Uganda. So Kenya has to be on high alert because of the traffic between the two neighboring countries as well. So that is something we expect to see going forward. Why mobile loans rate control plan is bad for small borrowers. The likes of Tala and all of those being discussed really after the central bank as well weighed in on that matter. Rotich now targets tax cheats to fund budget. We've discussed that. And inside Rotich's 3.1 trillion shilling budget also in your copy of the Business Daily, page 5 as well. So you might have to get yourself a copy and have a look at that as well. Those are the key stories in the dailies today. The theme, of course, and the major focus being on the budget reading that is expected today by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich. So let's have a look at some stories also regarding this. The National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich is today expected to table the national budget for the financial year running between July 2019 and June 2020. Now, this comes even as uncertainty hangs over the division of revenue bill, which ideally should guide how the national revenue is split between the national and county governments and hence guide a large part of the budget. Julian Samboko sat with the CS to look into this and other issues.
Now, behind me is the office of the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Henry Rotich, and at this point, being the 11th hour, he is combing through the budget to ensure all T's are crossed and all I's are dotted pertaining the details in the document. Now, I spoke to him regarding the potential stalemate with the Senate, which has indicated that the Division of Revenue Bill has not been passed, and this should be a predicate for the budget preparation. Now, this is what he had to say.
The consultation happened, when we were preparing the budget. We did add a meeting with the governors. It's unfortunate we didn't reach also an agreement. And then of course the division of revenue bills were prepared as per the law, the PFM law, which says that by 15th of February, I should submit a budget policy statement together with the division of revenue bill, together with the county allocation of revenue and the medium-term debt.
Tomorrow we anticipate that there are potentially more tax measures to be rolled out by the National Treasury, but the Cabinet Secretary is of the view that Kenya comparatively is actually enjoying a favorable tax environment.
Okay, let's look at Ghana, Zambia, maybe that's a level. What is their tax rate? Are they 0? Are they 15? Are they taxing people at 15? No, they are in 30. Some are in 32. So why in Kenya we look like we complain, and yet our neighbors here are having the same tax system? Sure. Yeah, Uganda, Tanzania, all of them are at 30. VAT in Uganda is 18%. VAT in Tanzania is 18%. We are 16%. Why are we complaining?
Now, all eyes shift to the National Treasury come tomorrow, with the budget statement being tabled at Parliament by 3 p.m. as required by the law. Now, NTV will be giving you a wall-to-wall coverage to ensure that you get the fine details of this and what this means for your pocket. Julian Amboko, NTV.
As Julian says there, wall-to-wall coverage beginning now all day through, as the Treasury CS is expected to read the budget statement for 2019-2020. This afternoon at Parliament. Now, senators are threatening to disrupt the reading of that budget if there's no agreement on the division of revenue bill by today. The senators accuse their colleagues in the National Assembly and the national government of frustrating efforts to channel more money to counties, saying it's becoming a habit that they should beg for a sizable share of the national cake to go to counties. The senators say it's illegal for the National Treasury to go ahead and read the budget, yet there is no agreement on the division of revenue. NTV's political affairs reporter Kennedy Mureithi reports on the intrigues.
A stalemate between the national government and the Senate persists over how much money should be forwarded to counties in the 2019-2020 financial year. Today, at a meeting with the Commission for Revenue Allocation, senators voiced their frustrations in their ongoing mediation that has representatives from both houses. According to senators, their efforts to fight for more cash to counties have been met with resistance from their counterparts in the National Assembly, who they accuse of using all manner of reasons to defeat their quest. The ongoing mediation is stuck at senators insisting on 327 billion shillings for the 2019-2020 financial year, while the National Assembly is stuck at 316 billion.
If for any reason we are going to be taken to a meeting tomorrow to appear as if we are rubber stamping the budget, we will not agree to those things.
But let me warn our National Treasury. The Division of Revenue Bill has not been determined, it has not been assented to by the President. They are reading a budget tomorrow. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional.
The Senate is accusing their counterparts in the National Assembly, backed by the national government, of bulldozing their way into imposing monies that should be forwarded to counties without listening to their concerns.
We'll make it an issue that the Treasury should not flout our law, our Constitution, the way they want to do. There is no budget. Article 218 of the Constitution says that the two levels of government will divide revenue according to division of revenue bill. Thereafter, CARA will be made, and thereafter, the budget estimates for the national government will be tabled in the National Assembly. but we don't want, what figure are they using? What share are they using?
We don't want the vision of revenue, which is a very serious issue for this country, to appear to be taken for granted. It can also appear casual. It cannot be treated casually, because this is how you begin to kill devolution.
The Kenya Human Rights Commission has also filed a petition at the Machakos Law Courts with a view to stopping the tabling of the budget Thursday afternoon, by the Treasury arguing it is illegal and unconstitutional to do it without following due process. The case will be heard Thursday morning. It is a requirement that all the East African countries read the budget on the same day and at the same time, but this confusion in Kenya that is being caused by the mediation committee and an impending court case may just jeopardize the budget reading in the country. Kennedy Mureithi, NTV in Nairobi County.
We'll wait to see how that pans out in the course of this morning, because the budget statement reading has to go on by afternoon. Now, how much do you spend on food on a daily basis? Your answer is most likely not the same as it would have been a few years ago. This tells a tale of the reality of the economy. On the day of the reading of the national budget, NTV's Charity Mwangi visited a family in Nairobi's Mukuru Kwanjenga slum, where she sought to understand the cost of living with key interest on food for a family of 6.
Wading through the mud, appropriately dressed with boots to boot, an experience that some feel is symbolic of life in the Kenyan economy. Grace Ngaiza, a resident of Mukuru Kwanjenga slums, takes us to her shop of choice, where she will get the most ideal prices to fit her family's limited income.
Mtu anafanya mjengo kama sisi hapa. Mzee anafanya mjengo. Na yeye ni mtu wa mkono, si fundi. Anapata 500. Piga 500 hiyo budget na tuko watu 6.
The 500 shillings her husband makes is spent on food. They pay 3,000 shillings for rent every month, and they have many other basic obligations which make the mathematics difficult to make sense. She says they get by somehow. Her expenditure is elaborate, and her mission is to always make her shillings spread far enough to meet their basic needs. They can neither afford luxuries nor expect too much of a meal.
Hiyo sasa ni unaweza pika tu chakula at least ya watu kukula tu ishikilie tumbo, ati si ile ya kushiba. Bora tu watu wakule kitu ishike tumbo.
For lunch, she prepares rice and bean stew. She bought the beans for 45 shillings a kilogram. The rice cost her 55 shillings a kilo. She bought cooking oil worth 100 shillings, tomatoes for 20 shillings, and 10 shillings for the onions. Every meal is carefully prepared, observing high standards of hygiene. Grace says she cannot afford healthcare, and so their mantra is inevitably, prevention is better than cure.
Sasa hata nikipata tuseme mtu akinisaidia na ngiri 2 na kwa nyumba sina chakula, unajua sitaenda hosi. Juu si kitu ya kawaida, hata ukiniangalia hivyo unaweza jua mimi ni mgonjwa.
The budget reading has in the past spelled steeper times for low-income earners. The struggle for the basics is so strong that Grace, like many others, sees little value in the larger projects that the government rolls out, borrows for, and funds. She feels the government is out of touch with Wanjiku.
Tuseme mtu kama mimi naweza kaa hapa hata tuseme 2 months sijaenda mahali. Hiyo sababu barabara haijanisaidia. Haijanisaidia kabisa. Hata hizi sijui nyumba wanajenga sijui nini. Mimi haijanisaidia. Juu hata wakijenga hawatanipea ya bora. Sasa waangalie vyakula.
As the government continues to focus on development projects that factor significantly on every year's budget, it seems that Nairobi residents care very little for the said projects, as their main concern is food for their families. Charity Mwangi, NTV.
I'm sure many of you share the sentiments by that family. You know, we might talk about trillions of shillings in the budget and all of that, but if it does not reflect on the ground, you know, for Mwananchi, the common man, and if they have to, you know, pay a bit more in terms of tax and in terms of levies and all of that to be able to foot that bill, then There's a disparity there. Now, farmers in the Rift Valley, the country's food basket, have decried the declining trend of budget allocation to agriculture, despite the sector's huge contribution to the country's gross domestic product. They say the move has impacted negatively on food security. Lois Wangoi spoke to farmers from Moy's Bridge who stated their disappointment with Treasury for failing to maintain, if not increase, monies to the Ministry of Agriculture.
Some maize farmers in the Rift Valley have expressed discontentment with the 59.1 billion shillings allocated to agriculture in rural and urban development that the 2019-2020 budget has set aside, an amount they say is a lower allocation than they would want. Their key concern is the likelihood that subsidized farm inputs such as seeds and fertilizer may not be adequately catered for, translating to increased costs of production and less profits for maize farmers.
Tumenyanyasika sana kwa sababu sasa wakiondoa hiyo budget yakisoma aondoe subsidies fertilizers, ni kumaanisha kwamba mtu tutarudi kwa ile society ambayo ni eat money society, kwa sababu utakuta mbolea hike mpaka 6,000.
They fear for further injury to a sector that has been hit by decreased crop production, poor infrastructure and lack of markets.
Ama tusipopata mbolea ambayo ni subsidized, kurudi shamba itakuwa ngumu. Na tunaona mambo ya umaskini itaendelea huko kwetu.
Parliament has already approved 59.1 billion shillings to be shared by agriculture in rural and urban development. Now, fears arrive that the government has allocated the bulk of the agricultural resources to support large-scale farming and export promotion, a move that may disadvantage small-scale farmers.
Mimi ningependa kuambia Mr. Rotich kwamba tunashangaa hawa ni watoto wanatoka sehemu za Rift Valley. Wabunge wetu wengi wanatoka Rift Valley, lakini tunashangaa ni kwa nini walipunguza budget ya wakulima.
Lois Wangoi, NTV Business, Eldoret.
Our discussion this morning in the markets, of course, revolves around the budget reading expected today by CS Henry Rotich. We have 3 guests in studio this morning to help us break this down to layman's, language, so to speak. So we have in the middle Eva Otieno, who is an economist with the Stanchart Bank, joining us this morning. Karibu. To my left here is Sam Mwaura, who is a tax expert with Grant Thornton. And over there is a resident analyst and economist, Tony Watima, who is an economist and also writes for the Business Daily as well. Welcome to studio this morning.
Thank you.
First of all, let me just, on a larger scale, on a general sense, your expectations this day as Rotich reads the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually do not expect too much from the CS. I'm looking at it, we are still talking about the Big Four. And this budget is all about a political desire to achieve the Big Four. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at it, him coming up and giving us the first majority of his budget will concentrate on what he plans to do or what they are going to do it. Mm-hmm. And then at the last is where we expect the bombshell on how he's going to meet his targets. Mm-hmm. So basically it's all about Big Four until I think the end of this political regime.
Okay. Eva?
Yes, I think what we've seen in the previous budgets is a focus on deep expenditure cuts, and the government maybe should look at more revenue-raising measures to try and meet their fiscal consolidation targets. And given the 3.1 trillion budget that we are seeing for financial year 20, we are seeing a 24% increase from financial year 19. And if you compare financial year 18 to 19, that was a 19% increase. So you're having a top line increasing at an accelerated rate. How are we going to fund that budget? So we could see more unorthodox measures. So looking at the digital economies, probably taxing that, or the informal sector, or maybe, what many of us don't like talking about, which is taxing the salaries. And we've already seen the CS comparing Kenya to other economies in Africa. And we've seen the income tax rates in those particular economies like Uganda, Ghana, being higher than Kenya. So it would not be a complete surprise if we see an increase in that.
You think he was alluding to something?
He was.
I hope not, but we shouldn't be surprised if that
because,
comes through.
Even the Standard says this morning that Rotich will hit you hard in budget. Hit you means perhaps you're expecting a bit more taxes or even levies, so to speak, to make sure that the government funds this 24% increase that you're talking about. Tony?
My opinion is that there is nothing to expect much, because first the budget policy statement comes in January from Treasury, so you get the kind of the outlook that Treasury is looking at, and so the biggest thing that we don't get is the part of financing. So what we expect from Rotich is much more about how do we finance this budget. So you look at revenue targets specifically. We made some revenue targets the fiscal year. We had target at 1.8. They scaled it down to 1.6, but we still didn't make that 1.6. So this year, it's another again 1.8. So we want to see what other measures that does he look at in trying to meet that target. So it means more taxation for the Kenyan taxpayer.
Okay, before we get to the issues, there's this stalemate between the National Assembly and the Senate regarding how much should be allocated to counties.
Yes.
And we expect that Rotich will read numbers that then are based on that. So what's going to happen? Because they're even thinking of stopping the CS Treasury from reading budget this afternoon, really. What do you think?
It's a matter of superiority complex. There's been a problem where the Senate and the Parliament have been looking at each other like who is more superior than the other. So if they cannot agree at their level and we've elected them to work for us, are they looking at their own interest or are they looking at our own interest? So it will be unfortunate if actually they get an injunction to stop this process today. And it doesn't augur well with the economy, in my opinion.
Eva, it's not Treasury's problem that the National Assembly and the Senate cannot agree on figures?
Yeah, we would say that, but if they go ahead and stop the process, the budget reading process, then that would put the East Africa Community criterion into jeopardy, where they're supposed to read the budget.
Yes.
Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, all at the same time. And would there be consequences for Kenya? We're not sure how that would play out. And given that all the three are supposed to read at the same time, we're not sure how that is going to happen. And Nyabola, whether we're going to have a budget being read today or not.
Tony?
Okay, there are two things. We changed the budget system within the new constitution, that it doesn't happen that when the minister announces the main things, that's when things kickstart. So the budget process starts very early, and so we know what will be rolled out. So when the minister comes to parliament, it's just a PR exercise on what you do exactly. And so even if they go to court, they will not be inhibiting a bigger part of it.
Yes.
It's only that in the next financial year, which starts in July, the kind of financing that will come into play is what they might stop. The second is that how we structure the budget process itself. National Assembly seems to have a lot of powers in determining who gets the allocation. Because after the CS reads the budget itself, it goes back to the committee of the National Assembly, Budget Committee of National Assembly. And they're the guys who decide most of the allocations that happen. So Senate and National Assembly will just need to have a discussion on what is the way forward, rather than creating a stalemate for everyone.
All right. Let me go back to this discussion on why Rotich will hit you hard in the budget. So obviously, like Eva said, 24% increase from last year's budget, last financial year. So then we expect that the target will be higher in terms of revenue collection, right? And KRA, then we expect will do a bit more. We've seen a raid there, of course, to look at some of the loopholes in terms of aiding tax cheats, those who are not paying taxes and all of that, just so we make sure that we collect all that we need to collect from businesses and individuals as well. But there's also a sense in which you expect a bit more, tax to be increased on items and commodities. We did see that last year, a lot of it actually, and we expect that to continue. But what is the cost of then increasing tax on and levies on some of the items and commodities and services that we have in the country? That really must have some sort of effect on the economy and on the individuals, really. What do you think?
First of all, even if we do not get surprises today, we should be wary of the finance bill which is coming. Because some of the increase in taxes are not captured in the budget, since it is a formality to read the budget today. It's just a budget statement, and we should be wary of what we expect. And secondly, it is not a guarantee even if they increase VAT today from 16 to 18, we will collect additional taxes, because Kenyans, as we know them, they have a way of reacting back to such increases by reducing consumption.
Exactly.
I'll give you a very good example of fuel last year. When the tax was increased, VAT was increased to 16, and then the president reduced it to 8%. Treasury did not collect the anticipated amount of VAT from fuel itself, because consumption was said to have gone down, which also affected the collection of excise duty. So it is not a must, or they should not depend on the figures which they have sat down at Treasury and said, if we increase taxes at this rate, then I expect to earn a certain amount of income from it, revenue from it.
Yes, so last year we did see increase on steel and iron products, paper and paperboard, textile and footwear, timber and furniture, vegetable oils, insecticides and pesticides, tourism, clean energy and grain storage. We expect that to increase even today in terms of items and services.
Yes, and you mentioned clean energy, but you know, as Kenya, we know that we're trying to increase our energy output reliance more on renewable energy. So if we continue on that particular path, then that may be contradictory to what we are trying to achieve. And also we've seen agriculture is taking a hit in terms of the expenditure. So again, we are seeing expenditure cuts on some of the areas that maybe should be a priority for the government, especially with the big four. And also when you look at the economy, agriculture is the now largest contributor to the GDP. So in essence, should you be feeding the golden goose in that sense?
All right. Tony, traditionally what we've seen is tax is most often increased on, the luxuries, so to speak. It's called sin tax. So it's maybe alcohol, cigarettes and stuff like that. But like he said, with the current struggles among individuals or among Kenyans, really, if you increase it on commodities that are not really a necessity, all I do is just stop consuming those. And therefore you don't achieve what you wanted to achieve in the end.
And he gave the right example, which is fuel. Government decided to tax fuel last year because a number of people, many people consume it. And it's one of the tax that you can collect much and you can net a lot of people. So the essence of it was that it's just purely about tax collection, increasing tax collection. So government will tend to avoid luxury goods because you gain little tax collection out of it. And so we expect a number of tax hikes. That one has to be there because there is no way you can finance 1.8, target 1.8 for revenue collection without increasing the current taxes that we are. Even if I heard that the CS talks about 18% VAT compared to these other countries. I think sometimes you wonder how we plan ourselves. 18%, the more you increase, it's a tax issue that economists would tell you. The more you increase taxes, the less you collect, especially with an emerging economy like Kenya. The more you increase the taxes, the more you literally will collect. The more burden you put on taxpayers, they literally will collect, and the more they will try to avoid it. You look at our current setup of our economy, we're not doing that well. We talk about a growth of 6.3%, but that's the supply side of where there is heavy government investments in the economy. Look at the demand side. You talk to any trader, they will tell you there's a liquidity problem in the market. The economy is not doing as well as it was 3 years ago. So this is the reality is that people, when they plan budgets, they need to have a touch on what exactly is happening. The demand side of this economy is continuing contracting every day, but we keep adding more taxes to it, and there is no rise in incomes. So there is no way you can collect a lot of taxes where there is no rising incomes.
Okay. Last year we had a deficit of 550, just close to 560 billion shillings. All right, so we set a very high target and then we miss it. And traditionally, this burden is on the Kenya Revenue Authority to come up with more ways of just being able to collect a bit more revenue. With an increase of 24%, we expect that the deficit would then also increase, which is a problem. So why are we having very ambitious budgets that cannot be funded? Then we end up borrowing a lot of money out there to plug in that hole.
I will tell you this for free. KRA follows orders. To me, it is not very independent in its operations because it knows clearly the challenges and the hiccups it faces when it goes to the market. And despite them understanding the fact that businesses are not doing well, the economy is not doing well, they have been given a target of 1.8 trillion. What do? they start being lethal, they start being ruthless to the genuine taxpayers. And the most unfortunate thing is that they depend on the same taxpayers who are on their radar, irrespective of whether they are tax compliant or not, and forget other taxpayers who are actually doing what I can call tax evasion. So it is upon KRA to come up with new methodologies and ways of following or increasing the tax pool of taxpayers into this country if they are to achieve anything near this, but I don't see them achieving the target.
But if they have to achieve that, then they also have to seal some of the loopholes, Eva, in terms of just combating tax cheats. The other day there was a story from a Mombasa businessman who owes the government over 1 billion shillings. He's a car importer, 1 billion shillings. And this is something that started all the way in 2013. Can you imagine? So, and we all here have to agree that some of these people are aided by individuals within the KRA. And that's, of course, as because of what we saw in terms of the raids of individuals who then have been able to play a part in this. KRA must then also seal some of these loopholes to ensure that every single individual who needs to pay tax, and especially businesses, do so. There are some government officials who do businesses here and there who as well are accused of, not paying tax as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you rightfully said, that we need to seal this fiscal slippages in a, if you put it in a diplomatic term. And one of the ways in which you can seal these fiscal slippages is just being more intentional and hard on these taxpayers who are not paying the rightful tax that they should, which again is eating into the tax revenue numbers. What we are also seeing, just to go back on your point of increasing nominal deficit numbers, we are looking at over 680 billion KES. We could see additional borrowing, but this borrowing could be skewed more to the local borrowing. Again, what does that do to private sector investment, which we've seen has already declined? And when you look at private sector credit growth, for example, we are seeing a 4.9% increase on a year-on-year basis from over 15% in 2015 and prior to that. And that's also affecting the demand side that Tom was alluding to. What we are seeing is strong economic growth numbers, but these economic growth numbers are not translating into the tax revenues, which we call tax buoyancy ratio. We're not seeing that elasticity happening. And one of the ways, or one of the reasons why we're not seeing that happening, is the growth is really skewed to the sectors in the economy, particularly the informal sectors, that are not contributing as much to the tax revenues. So we should be investing in those sectors that would have the largest or the highest uptick in terms of tax revenue collection. Meaningfully, when you look at manufacturing, for example, tourism to some extent, but we've also seen tourism increase or improve in the last couple of years, especially on the back of the security investments that the government has made. So, but how much can we tax tourism? So we should look at sectors where we could see largest uptick in terms of investment into the tax revenues.
All right. Tony James Githi Mburu is taking over as the Commissioner General. I'm sure you've discussed him and analyzed him general so much. He's, of course, a former spy, intelligence background and stuff, and is actually credited with what's been happening at KRA lately. Of course, we understand. Some people say he was brought in by Njiraini to take over and stuff like that. In your understanding and perhaps in your knowledge of the gentleman, do you think he will be able to deliver in terms of just sealing those loopholes that we are talking about first, and then secondly, being able to collect the amount is required to without some of these deficits that we are seeing?
Okay. Let me, before I answer that, I wanted to get something that you asked them before, because that's the crack of the matters in this budget, about the deficit. One of the main things in this budget is about the deficit, and Treasury has been playing numbers with it. Last fiscal year, our deficit was around 600 billion. So we looked at, the Treasury looked at the budget that we cannot afford it, and then they scaled it down. The word that Eva used here, it's a technical term, it's physical consolidation, as economists say. So we might be too technical. So they tried to squeeze a little bit of things out of it. We came to 570 billion. That's how we reduced our deficit. And so this year, again, we have higher targets. And so the number that they put 1.8 trillion as the collection that they target is specifically because IMF requires them to have their budget deficit at around 5.6. So that figure there is just to do mathematics for it. It's not their revenue target. You look at last year, it's the same thing they did. They put that target there because the IMF gives them a target of deficits. And so the problem is that we are not having genuine conversations when we try to structure these budgets. And that's the biggest thing that Treasury keeps failing every year. Now, back to the question about the new Commissioner General. I think if it's targeting, we are looking at going forward and targeting tax cheats and guys who are evading taxes, I think he's the right guy. But in my opinion, I think the problem we have in Kenya today is that we are taxing Kenya very highly, and the reason why people try to evade taxes is because the tax burden is quite heavy. And so in a compliance position, you will try to look at how do you reduce the burden so that many people can pay taxes. And so we need to find that KRA needs to be more innovative in terms of policy and tax structures on how do you make more people compliant. It's not how about sealing loopholes. Because sealing loopholes, anyone will tell you, is more about having a higher tax burden that people try to evade it. So what is the best way forward on how do you increase tax revenue compliance? And so that will be my position, that KRA, if I was advised KRA going forward, how do you make Kenyans more compliant?
Okay.
And I think that is reducing the burden itself.
All right. You want to add
Yeah,
something?
can I just add to his sentiments and say we should give the new Commissioner General time and see how he performs. People might have been saying that position he was in before was created for him just to become our next Commissioner General.
Yes.
But we should also note that our current central bank governor is said to have been number 2 in the interview, but he was given the position. But look at the monetary policies of this country at this time. Top notch. Inflation has been contained. So we should, 3 years is not much at that level. He will realize by 2022 that his time is over. And we should just watch and see.
Watch and see what happens. Talking about central bank and the the governor there, he was, of course, another term in office alongside the deputy and the chairman, Mohamed Nyabola, because of course, some of the issues that you bring about. And one key thing that he's done, just not too long ago, is introduce the new currency notes into the market, and discussions around that, whether the legality of the manner in which it was done aside. Let's talk about the impact this will have on the economy, because if there exists actually individuals who are hoarding money, and we have been told that they are, for whatever reason, the next, now it's what, 3.5 months for them to get it out into the economy. And we expect that when that happens, there'll be an influx, on circulation, actual circulation. Forget the one that is being kept by individuals. How will that affect the economy coming at a time when we are doing a new budget? And perhaps we expect a lot more to circulate. There's been warnings that commodities and prices might go up because, and the delicate balance with the effect of that on, say, perhaps inflation and things like that.
I think from a demonetization angle, what we could see is an inflationary impact from what you alluded to, if there's going to be an increase in prices. But also we've seen increased vigilance from the banking sector, at least, with guidance from the central bank, where we're not supposed to accept monies up to a certain level before reporting to the central bank. So that increased vigilance may kind of moderate that inflationary impact, where we would see increase in money supply. And also the issues that we had before, the concern was on the FX rate. Could we see more people converting KES to dollar so that they can be able to evade this? But then again, the forex bureaus have also been put on very high alert to make sure that does not happen. And if we could compare Kenya to India, that went through a demonetization plan in 2016, India was over a very short period of time.
Exactly.
Yeah, almost half of Kenya.
The effect was bigger.
Yes, exactly. And depending on what source you're looking at, some people are saying it was even 3 weeks. But for Kenya, we're looking at 4 months, close to 4 months. And that may be able to moderate some of these negative consequences that may arise from a demonetization plan.
Has it an effect on the budget and our expenditure going forward this year? You want to say something?
I don't think so, because recently, personally, I got a WhatsApp of a list of 200 people who are holding money in their homes, and I was wondering, like, somebody just picked certain names which are well known in the society. But I'm looking at it this way: the central bank governor has sanitized the banking sector. But if you look at it this way, this country has got 45 banks, 43 to 45 banks, meaning each tribe has got its own bank, unfortunately. We have got like 72 foreign exchange, we have got hundreds of Shylocks. But even if these people who are holding money in their homes decide to go and exchange them, there are regulations which have been released, and some of these foreign exchange have actually put instructions that they will not be receiving a certain amount of money, above a certain amount of money for exchange. Stock exchange traders, some of them have issued instructions that they will not be allowing people to bank money into their accounts. So I'm sure it will be a problem for them to achieve that aim of trying to change into foreign currency. Okay. Yeah, they are in for a shock, in my opinion.
Are we going to lose money, Tony? If you can't explain it, obviously you cannot bank it, you know, because Eva and her colleagues here will not allow you to do that. And if you have to go through central bank, you
Let me steer the debate a little bit differently. Let me first start by answering about illicit financial flows. I think demonetization doesn't help in trying to curb illicit financial flows. And we can work on numbers.
In the long term?
Even in the short term. Let's work on numbers. Central Bank says they have 270 something million notes.
Yes.
Over 1,000 shilling notes. In terms of value of the total currency in the market, it's around 270 billion. If you look at, in terms of numbers, how many notes are there, if you count one by one, they form only 40% of the total currency. So it means around, you say about 200 people have maybe a billion. You calculate on those numbers, they might be having more than what is central bank numbers have. So if you're talking about if there are people who have even at least a billion of cash somewhere, there might be less than 10 people only. And so that should be a very easy thing for central bank and the intelligence of this country and many people to trace those 10 people. That number is very minimal, and so we don't have a policy. I don't think it's a right policy that you bring policy for around 10 people only. But you know, it's a constitutional requirement. The other thing is that about demonetization, I think I will differ with Eva a little bit, so we steer this debate a little further. I don't think we'll expect an inflation, because first it should be a currency swap. You bring in the old one and you give out the new one. And so that has to be carefully done by banks. So it's a currency swap 1 for 1. The biggest issue will be that one of my biggest worries is because when the central bank announced this during the Madaraka Day, it's the same day that the president announced that government is going to pay government contractors. And so I will want that I'm wrong, that government is not printing this new money to pay government contractors, because that's where inflation will come in.
Okay.
But if you are to strictly apply on demonetization about swapping the new currencies, in fact, the effect should be a little bit the opposite, that you might be sucking out money out of the circulation itself, and you're not bringing the new money quickly. You create a cash crunch. And so the effects of it will be looking more inflationary, but it's not an inflation.
Okay.
If I could just opine, the inflationary impact would be this money supply that does not want to go into the formal financial system. So you would see an increase, possibly an increase in buying of commodities or goods, that's trying to deviate from going into the formal financial sector. So that's where the moderate inflationary impact is coming from.
Okay.
And also on the demonetization curbing illicit flows, I think that would be a success to some extent, because even when you look at other case studies that have happened around the world, India, for example, that was one of the reasons as to why they put through the demonetization program. So it was one, to curb corruption and also terrorism. And what we saw is after some time, once the demonetization period came to an end, piles of cash were around the streets because there was nowhere to take them. So in that way, I think he would be able to curb.
Has your bank rolled out the new currencies? Are they in ATM?
Actually, I was very surprised to go to the ATM about 2 days ago, and I got a very new 1,000 shillings note.
Wow.
And I didn't want to spend it because it looked very good.
Yeah, okay. Very quickly, as we take a break.
Okay. I think one of the main things that if you look at India, if you're learning an experience about demonetization, is that they failed to curb illicit financial flows. In the 2-year period after they brought in the demonetization thing, the Central Bank of India, the Federal Reserve Bank of India, received 99% of the money in circulation back into their system. So if you receive 99%, it means those people who are having money out there managed to access the financial system. And one of the biggest things that India is called out, this is because for them, it was not a constitutional requirement as us. It was specifically fighting financial inflows. And they missed that after 2 years. What will be keen to see in Kenya is that I think if Central Bank will be genuine enough, they'll give us the data on how much money they received from circulation. If they received 99% of the money, then we didn't curb any financial illicit flow.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a short break on AM Live this morning, and when we come back, we'll be discussing the effect of demonetization on, the regional economy. We are seeing Tanzania and Uganda, of course, reacting to this by, to a certain degree, stopping exchange between their currencies and the Kenya shilling as well, and that how it affects then our economy and business within the region in itself. Don't go too far. Welcome back to AM Live this morning, live from the Nation's Center. Inside the markets is our discussion today. We are talking about the budget preparations or expectations, so to speak, with three economists and tax experts as well to talk us through some of the issues that are coming about as a result of the expected budget reading this afternoon by Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich. So we were talking about demonetization, and we've seen Tanzania react. Uganda as well, I think, has reacted to this by freezing, exchange of Kenyan currency with their own, and this is going to affect the regional economy, so to speak.
I was not surprised by Tanzania. Tanzania will do anything to hurt Kenyans, and it is expected. Secondly, it came as a surprise for Uganda because I thought we had a good relationship with Uganda. But I will not discount the fact that probably the central bank had a hand in this, in issuing instructions to central bank of both countries to make sure that no one crosses the border, which is the easiest way to just go and exchange this currency. But looking at it this way, how many people are actually holding money in their houses? I don't think the numbers are those too many to make an impact in the economy. That's my opinion.
Okay. Yes.
I think what we might see is an increase in virtual money use, so particularly M-Pesa, mobile channels, and given that some of these mobile channels are cross-border, then we could see an improvement in those numbers as a way of people shifting from using cash to more of a cashless economy. And how Uganda and Tanzania have reacted, is, I would say, understandable, because we are living in a world where nations are trying to protect themselves.
Yes.
If you look at what's happening in global trade, US and China, US and Mexico, and so that's also filtering into our markets. Particularly the issues that we've had with Tanzania. Again, as Samuel rightfully said, that was not a surprise. But Uganda, maybe we could expect some leeway. But what I can see, what we expect from an economic perspective is just an increase in the use of mobile money, just so that they can circumvent the use of cash.
Yeah, because the two countries are reacting from a macroeconomic level, just trying to cushion their economies and the effect on that. But this is affecting people, individuals, on a microeconomic level. I mean, students who perhaps, do cross-border education and training and all of that.
My understanding is that by the time the Central Bank of Tanzania and Uganda issue that statement, I think they had a communication with the Central Bank of Kenya.
Yes.
Because my understanding is that how I read the press, the letter from the Central Bank of Tanzania, is that most likely the money that comes through their banks within Tanzania ends up in the central bank, which is the currency reserve, and then you exchange it to the Kenyan money.
Yes.
Kenyan side will not be taking that amount in exchange. And so that's why they implemented that policy. And so for me, I think it's a wrong policy if Central Bank of Kenya are the people who inform them, because a lot of trade happens within these borders. And so these are people who most likely use cash. So what do you tell them within this period that they need to acquire the new currency in order to conduct their business within the borders? I think probably they should put a limit, because I didn't see any limit that was set. They would have said maybe people with 100,000 is people who can transact business within the borders itself. And people who are maybe at 5 million and people like that, they will not have a currency conversion. So that one will help, because the same thing that is being applied in this 4-month period will have helped also in these borders. But locking out people in terms of business and telling them that you need to have the new currency, and probably those currencies have not yet gone to the border, I think we are punishing people who are not the wrong people.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the Business Daily, page 4 and 5, because as we go back to our discussion on the budget expectations today, so what there is there, I don't know if you can see this or can show our viewers this. The total budget, according to that, is 3.02 trillion shillings, all right? And have a look at that box there with the Big Four agenda. Expected to get 14% of the total budget. You can see how much investment is being put into this by the government. Manufacturing, 125.42 billion shillings. Health, 82.8 billion shillings. We haven't seen much in terms of the pilot of the UHC as well. The 4 counties, we have yet to see a report on that. And then have a look at housing there, 103.15 billion shillings. All right. I don't know whether this is part of it is coming from the housing fund levy, if it does go through, because we've seen the resistance of that as well. And agriculture and food production and food security, I should say, is 55.97 billion shillings. So like you said, a decrease of some sort, not really heavy investment into agriculture as well, because we saw what happened with the Galana Kulalu project, you know, billions of shillings lost in that. Then selected allocations to service domestic debt, 600, just about 700 billion shillings, because some of our debts, I think, are maturing this month or next,
This
right?
month, yeah, next month.
Next month, yes. Yeah. And Ajira Fund, 1 billion shillings to facilitate jobs for the youth. Sports, refurbishing some of those facilities, 500 million shillings, all right? And then we have farmers fertilizer subsidy, 2 billion. Can you imagine that it was 4.3 billion before? So it's been reduced? Okay. Expenditure plan, consolidated fund, 805, and all those other things. So if you look at these numbers, heavily, you know, investment going into the Big Four agenda, because this is something the president is very passionate about, to address some of the issues, but he has 3 years, really, to do some of these things. And I think the one that is coming out seriously right now is the issue of the housing fund levy and a bit of health as well. Because we are introducing that levy to be able to finance the building of houses, affordable houses for Kenyans, and especially in the low-income, you know, bracket in that. So we expect this afternoon that the budget reading will, of course, some of the allocations will focus more on the Big Four agenda as well.
From where I'm sitting, I have no problem with the National Housing Development Fund. But I feel it is the obligation of the government to provide housing. The National Housing Act, which was enacted late in 1950s and was suspended. I mean, where has the government been from 1950 only to wake up now and realize this is what we are supposed to be doing? We have National Housing Corporation, which has been building houses, but unfortunately the houses have been targeted by the well-off in the society. When you are telling the masses of the population, the Kenyan citizens, to contribute towards the National Housing Development Fund, and some of us have been opted out from benefiting from that, which is also not a problem, because probably we can afford mortgages, which rates are still high, in my opinion, at 14 or 13%. It is not right on the way or the modalities they want to use in distributing these houses. They are saying it will be a rotary basis, meaning even that person who really needs a house might not get an opportunity. So they are just bringing betting, in quotes, back to National Housing Development Fund, which is a trial and error basis, which is not fine with me. If I can just talk about agriculture, I've grown up to know that agriculture is a backbone of the economy. And unfortunately, I've not seen much from what we've achieved from agriculture, because this is an economy that, I mean, agriculture depends on rainfall and with the weather. When we are hard hit by the weather, then we do not see anything. Last year, we had a lot of cry from maize farmers, where people went, bought maize from Uganda, came and sold, and they were given the first priority in terms of payment. How do you leave your own people who are feeding the nation in such a state, and yet you expect them to come up again next year and provide the necessary stocks you need at NCPB? So it is not a problem, or rather I agree with this issue of them reducing the budget from 4.3 billion to 2 billion, in the sense that even the fertilizer subsidy we've been talking about, there was a story about a fertilizer factory in Eldoret. But let me tell you, this fertilizer factory, it does more of mixing of fertilizer than manufacturing. It does more of mixing. So, and it doesn't make sense to allocate 4.3 billion to offer subsidy, which will benefit the intermediaries and not the real farmer. So this is a good move, in my opinion, in terms of fertilizers and subsidies.
I think our view is that the government has been prudent to look at ways in which they can raise revenue to fund the Big Four agenda. So in as much as some of these revenue measures have not really seen the light of day, like the housing levy, for example. But we think, that's a mark of some prudence. And, as Samuel rightfully mentioned, there's been some underinvestment for a very long period of time. And maybe now, as the government is seeking for, to look at ways in which they can reduce their expenditure or spending through fiscal consolidation, which again, with this budget, we're not seeing how that's going to happen. So far, we think that's a bit ambitious in terms of the fiscal consolidation plan. But that said, when we see these specific revenue measures towards the big four, that is a good measure to just see ways in which they can raise funding in a sustainable way. But once those houses have been built, then a lottery way of allocating them may not be the best way. Yeah.
Okay. My opinions will be a little bit different. First is that the big four agenda, out of the four, I think 3 fall under county governments, part of the devolved functions. And so the national government has tried to twist as the bigger player in terms of directing policy and the framework on how to implement it, without involving the county governments. So I think the implementation part, the national government fails. You look at housing, that's one of the main things that I have been critical. I think we got it very wrong, because I come from a school of thought that government intervention in the economy should not be that much. That you leave where the government comes in, there's always been problems. And so government should create an environment for private sector to thrive and try to solve problems that are there in terms of monetizing it as a profit-making venture. And so you look at this big four agenda and you look at the kind of policy frameworks that are behind it. It's about people within these offices trying to raise money and be in control of a lot of money. But we're not solving the problem itself. For example, in housing, Kenya's cement is around 40% higher compared to our peers. Talk about Egypt.
And West Africa mostly, where we have Dangote.
So the question will be, what is government solving from that end? You talk about steel. Steel is one of the most expensive inputs in construction in Kenya.
It was increased last year, taxes.
Yeah, they continue increasing taxes. So it's double speak to say that you're trying to solve a housing problem. You increase taxes on the other side, and then you talk about raising funds from people on the other end. So it's not, that's the problem with government policy direction. So we are not solving the problem itself, but we are creating laws that you're just trying to raise revenue so that people who are under these dockets are controlling much of money that goes into this project. So even if we put around 450 billion, much of it is just people trying to control money and not solving a problem that we have itself. Okay. One of the biggest problems, again, is agriculture. One of the main, it's a devolved function. So we'll want to see what is the role of county governments in trying to solve the agricultural problems that we have, the shortages that we have. But we see that government has, most of the function still remains within the Ministry of Agriculture. And so it's because allocations, much of the money goes there. We are not solving problems in terms of fertilizer subsidy. All these years we've been given subsidies. What are the benefits, or what have we achieved in terms of giving farmers subsidies? We found out that it's only specific people who gain, people who have access to patronage. They are the guys who benefit. The ordinary farmer rarely benefits from these subsidies, especially on agricultural commodities. Yeah. So the biggest problem that we have here is that we are not looking on how we are solving this big four agenda that we talk about. And that is my biggest issue with this big four.
All right, revenue plan. This is how the Treasury is expected to collect, or the government at least is expected to fund this budget. So revenue from taxes should form 70%. That's about 2.1 trillion shillings, all right, for that. So obviously issues of tax, whether it's income, whether it's VAT, commodities and imports and those other things. 70%, that's very big. And then you have foreign borrowing, 20%. So we still expect to do a lot more of that in terms of currently at 5.3 something trillion shillings, our debt burden. Domestic borrowing is 10%. And you were talking about this, Eva. And in fact, some of the banks even are finding it more easier to invest in, say, government bonds, right?
Yes.
Other than give that money to an individual because of the reduction of the interest rate cap at 14%. And I'd like you to tell me something about this, Eva. Because you're saying I'd come to a bank, I'm looking for money. So as an individual, the risk is higher, especially on for 13.5 or whatever percentage it is. So you decline my request then on that basis and would rather invest it on infrastructure bonds by government because the return then is much better and the risk is less, really. Because then this affects SMEs, it affects startups, it affects individuals really in terms of how to develop.
It's true, and as banks, we need to be an intermediary, a proper intermediary. But we also have another mandate, which is to provide a good return to some of our shareholders. And if we're in an environment where you have an interest rate cap against a non-performing loan ratio of one of the highest in the recent years of 12.9%, very close to 13%. So for every 100 shillings that I'm lending, I can only get net of 13 shillings back. So, factoring in that loss of revenue against the fact that you can go to the government bills and bonds, and you've mentioned one of the government bonds being infrastructure bonds that are tax-free, you're looking at a return of 12% tax-free, and it's also risk-free. And when you look at the banking books, there's been a substantial shift from doing the core business, which is lending, to going to lending to the government. So when you look at the increase in the government bills and bonds, you're seeing a double-digit increase in that from an asset side, versus the lending side, which has really been quite anemic. But the essence of that is also to protect the returns that we are getting in a also highly competitive environment.
Okay. Sam, what it means then in that case is that it's an explanation to how the economy is struggling. Because if, as an individual, and I want to start up a business or something of that sort to create employment for myself and other people around me, and I'm not able to access credit because of this cap, interest rate cap. And it was very populist, if you think about it. A lot of people have discussed this. It was populist in the sense of we wanted to appease the populace. But the net effect is that now we are not even able to get that money, and businesses are struggling because of that. How has this affected the economy in terms of just SMEs, startups, and microeconomic issues, really?
Just to add up of what Eva has said, I'm totally against the government borrowing locally, and I will encourage them to borrow. Go for foreign loans, which are also long-term and not short-term. Because what we are seeing currently is once they exhaust one source of funds, then they go to the next, and they are now borrowing to pay loans, which is affecting you and me as individuals, affecting SMEs as we're talking. And that's why people have been asking, where is money? There's that general feeling that there's no proper circulation of money into the economy. So it will be a challenge for the CS. I'm putting a challenge to him. Forget about the local market for now. Though I still have a feeling that the banks are in business, as she said, and they can support the government if need be. It is in record. Last year, if you look at the financial of some of the banks, there's a bank with a loan portfolio which is equal to the budget we had in 2003 at 260 billion. That is a loan portfolio, of which half of it was to government. So for government to continue borrowing to the local banks is okay. Probably that is what will help the cap rate to remain at 13. But how many people who can also afford borrowing at that rate? They still feel the rate is too high. And we are saying if something can be done to reduce the rate further, the better. But as a business person operating a bank, shareholders and everyone, they still need to get their return on investment. So it is a challenge to the government as to where they need to get money. Probably what I can say is the war between US and China,
yes,
might end up benefiting us at the end. The Chinese might relax their rules on funding Kenya further and just to prove something wrong to the US, and let's see how it plays along. We never know.
And even this foreign borrowing, Tony, last time we were looking for around 360 billion from China to complete the second phase of the SGR from Naivasha to Kisumu. We didn't find that money, and there's been worries around that as well as to the fate of the project. Now speaking, the other day Henry Rotich did write a wonderful letter to the World Bank, looking for around 70 billion
70
shillings.
billion, yeah.
As to whether what he said were true is a discussion for another day. The letter was brilliant, very convincing, if you think about it. So we are looking for other avenues to, and we just floated another Eurobond. What's it? 250 billion?
200
yes, and I think World Bank also has agreed to give us that money. So we are looking at a lot more of borrowing to be able to, fund the deficit that we are looking at.
Yes, and one of my main issues also will be on the revenue part, is the risk of foreign borrowing. Someone thinks that
it's better. It's a better option.
I differ a little bit, especially if you're going for non-concessional loans. If you're going for commercial loans, the risks are very high, especially on our exchange rate and the kind of, we look at our debt structure itself. A slight move of the Kenya shilling, a slight loss of the Kenya shillings, we hike our debt very highly. So the risks are very high looking at our position, our debt structure itself today. And so I will tend to avoid that the CS will try to look at concessional loans alone, which means it's most infrastructure loans, and then the interest rate itself are fixed. They're not commercial loans that the interest, like the Eurobond. Those are the things that completely need to avoid. And the Eurobond that we talk about doesn't come in this financial year. It was in these that is ending. So the next financial year, government will probably looking at another Eurobond. And so that is my biggest issue itself on the foreign borrowing. But I can understand from Samuel's position. The biggest problem that we have is that I don't understand what government does, because if you talk about domestic borrowing, there's no problem about domestic borrowing that much if you're not crowding out private investments out of the credit market. Now, if I would advise Treasury, I think the main issue would be, you look at one bank has 60% of their revenues coming out of government borrowing. Then it means you're the biggest player in that market. Why doesn't government try to negotiate better interest rate for the Kenyan taxpayer? Because you give a lot of high, very interest rates, and bank will always come for them. And so government benchmark itself is very high. So for the SME guy who wants to borrow in the credit market, it becomes very highly. If government can negotiate very fair interest rates, I think it gives a position that the SMEs can have a chance. And so that is the biggest problem that we have with the interest rate capping. It has a very negative effect because it's created room for government completely to borrow and lock out other people. So if government cannot find a way to repeal the interest rate cap, then let them negotiate at a very good interest rate for government borrowing, so that the interest rate might come down for the other average Kenyan.
All right. Let's reduce it to the level of Mwananchi now. So we are looking to collect 3.02 billion shillings to fund the budget. From a macroeconomic level, we've spoken about where we're going to get this money, but it comes at a cost to the taxpayer. Whether it's tax, revenue from tax, whether it's from foreign borrowing or even domestic borrowing, there's a cost. The other day when we did a story on the debt burden for Kenya, we were talking about close to 4 trillion shillings. And then the effect would be, on a population of 47.5 million, then every Kenyan owes about 110 or thereabout thousand shillings, all right? You feel that pressure already. And on an average, and how many people actually earn 100,000 shillings going forward, you see? So it's an amount that, however ambitious it is, it has an effect on the common Mwananchi. So it means we are raising taxes for you. It means you are having to tighten your belt in terms of revenue, and that affects most people, because if the economy is struggling, the common man is struggling. So.
What the common Mwananchi is looking at is putting food on the table.
Yes.
And not, as we saw in the earlier story, is having 10,000 kilometers of tarmac roads. Some of these plans that are covered in this budget are all political. And first of all, this figure of 3.1 trillion, in my opinion, it might be not even be 3.1 trillion. It might be an inflated figure, it might be an understated figure, we never know, because Treasury will never be clear to the common mwananchi as to how much they are actually working on. It is a guarded secret within the group that handles the budget process in this country. But the government needs to improve the economic situation in the country to make food affordable, basic needs affordable. Because what we are suffering right now in this country is cash flow malnutrition, either at the government level or at the individual level. And the common factor that brings us together is the appetite for borrowing. That is why you see Fuliza is doing well, Hela is doing well, Tala is doing well.
The other branch.
Yeah, you see, all these Shylocks and if you drive along any highway, today you'll see logbook loan 24 hours. Callers will give you loan within 12 hours. You see, that business people have taken advantage because they know anytime today you need to do well, and you need to, the only thing you need to do is to lend your money. And there are investors, there are PE who have come in and put in their money, willing to lend gullible Kenyans into this. So it is a sad state of affair which you are facing. If I can't get food on my table, then I cannot be productive. Even if you give me electricity, even if you give me roads, even if you give me water, I'll not be productive at all. Yes.
Do you expect this to continue? Yes, Eva?
Yeah, no, just to add on to what Samuel was talking about in terms of the emergence of some of these channels in terms of that lend money. And when you look at the total cost of the interest rate, which we also look at a measure known as the annual percentage rate that tends to add on the interest rate plus other costs, insurance, other facility costs, you find that the total percentage rate that the average Kenyan is getting is northwards of 25%, which was higher than what the average bank would give you even in the heydays. So maybe there's room for that conversation to happen in terms of making the average Kenyan aware of how much they're actually paying for this relatively easy money to come by, and what does it do to the default rates as well. About several months back, the World Bank released a report. They normally tend to release a biannual report every April and October that talks about the state of the Kenyan economy. And they tried to come up with a figure of the public arrears in terms of what government is owing to the suppliers. And the figure was around 1.6% of GDP, which is quite a high amount. And if you take out, if the government actually goes ahead and settles some of these obligations that they've rightfully said even in the paper that we're reading today, we could see an improvement in the non-performing loan ratio. So we could see that money affecting the banking sector positively, and maybe we could have even more prudent discussions regarding once the rate cap is removed, because we are also within the 1-year period that the judiciary gave parliamentarians to do something about the rate cap. So we could have more productive discussions around how we can increase borrowing rates for the average Kenyan, especially against the background where non-performing loan ratios or your default rates are quite low.
Okay.
Well, I think the problem that we have, which Eva has talked about, that World Bank says the figure itself, Eva has put it a little bit technical, 1 point something of GDP.
Please reduce it to my level.
The figure is around 400 billion.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that one can be better in consumption. 400 billion is what government owes in public arrears. I think the problem we have is that a lot of people, despite the interest rate cap locking out SMEs, government has not paid contractors for a period of time, around 3 years. So it has created a shortage in terms of the demand side, where people have a lot of money. So much of the money is in government and people who are doing projects, and there are people who have not paid. So it creates a liquidity problem. And so if government can pay the 400 billion, I don't know where they'll get the amount from. But if they can pay that, it will be an injection to the economy that you're trying to stabilize the economy itself. Because the economy itself has the biggest problem. It's a liquidity problem that we have, that even the central bank talks about, the governor itself, that we have a liquidity problem. governments needs to solve that liquidity problem, because the main things are interest rate cap, failure to pay government contractors, and there is a contraction itself on the economy to that effect.
President Uhuru Kenyatta, in his address on Madaraka Day, did urge, the government agencies, both levels of government actually, to pay their pending bills, and we are seeing that on this directive, that those owed between 10 million and below will be paid. And he actually said that that should be done before the end of the financial year.
Yeah, that means
so
three weeks from now.
3 weeks from now that the government
Yes.
should have paid.
Yeah.
That should be something good for suppliers.
Which I wish it will be done. I hope it will be done.
You don't think it will be done?
Counties have a problem.
Exactly.
And
Exactly, yeah.
I think the creation of devolution devolved problems from the national government to national counties. If you look at the way the county governments are behaving as we speak, is they're like spoiled kids. All they do is cry how much they are owed by the national government, and they are not focusing
on how much they
generating income at their own level to pay their suppliers. And it is a sad affair because most of their suppliers are very good individuals. I mean, individuals in the market, individuals in the counties who were relying, honestly worked and were relying on those supplies to continue doing business, some of which have decided we can no longer do business. And that's why the level of unemployment in this country
is very high.
Yes,
So counties actually owe something between $500 million to 1.5 billion.
I don't think they have the money to pay, so it will be a mirage.
Then if they are relying on the national government to disperse funds, then that actually is the beginning of the problems, because you have to have mechanisms to also collect a bit more in terms of revenue. And counties like Nairobi, which should be able to collect a lot more. Right now we are even seeing a problem with the revenue collection system because of Jambo Pay withdrawing. Then that affects revenue collection.
I think I will take it a different angle. I think the drafters of the Constitution were trying to devolve functions. They were not looking at making counties. I've heard people talk about counties being economically viable, which I don't understand what they mean. But the essence was trying to decentralize function and resources from the national government but down to county governments, where closer to people. And so when we talk about that counties need to generate much of their revenue on itself, my worry is that counties feel that they need to burden people with more taxes, with more levies and all those kind of things to raise money for themselves. And one of the main things you talk about to manufacturers, counties has been the biggest inhibitors in the growth of manufacturing sector, because there are costs that comes every day. You talk about taxes between counties to counties, you talk about business licensing, you talk about many issues. Countries tend to generate, because everyone is telling them raise your own revenue, they try to pose more burden. Despite KRA's burden, counties also pose burdens to the people at the bottom end. And so that's my biggest worry, that when we talk about counties being self-reliant, they tend to interpret it differently.
Yes.
But the question about paying the contractors, the issue is that government does not have money. The issue is not anything else. Whether it's national government or county governments, both of them don't have money. So the issue when we talk about the president directive that is issued a directive to pay money, where is the money? That's the question that we should be asking. Where is the money coming from? Because Treasury has failed. He has promised, but the issue we talk about, you look at the budget itself that we are looking at the next financial year. Where is the money itself? We talk about 500 billion being owed to government contractors. That's the same amount as Big Four agenda. It's not not a little money.
Yeah.
So where exactly is that money that we want to see that you're talking about paying? That's the biggest question that we'll ask.
I think on the issue of counties being able to raise their own revenue, obviously it has to be regulated when it comes to levies and stuff like that. But you have counties that have resources that they can benefit from. Narok has a Masai Mara Game Reserve, shared revenue between them and the national government. Mombasa, tourism is very big there. And Nairobi is the economic hub of this country. Surely they must be able to raise a bit more. And if we don't even know the numbers, we don't even know where our money goes to, and you know, then they should be able to collect their own Tony, is what we are saying.
I don't think
However
so.
much.
I don't think so. I think the best we are doing in this country, look at KRA itself. Tax burden is around 19% of GDP. That is one of the highest in Africa. You talk about Uganda, around 14%. You talk the average tax revenue collection to GDP in Africa is around 14 to 15%. In Kenya alone, we talk about KRA. We have not talked about counties. We are at around 19%. The average, if you're trying to grow this economy, it's that we are an emerging economy. We need to have more people with income on their pockets, not government taking much of that income. And so we talk about revenues and the resources that county governments have. County governments are the best people to try and nurture business from the start. And so if county governments are the people who want to levy on sectors, I think they'll be the biggest inhibitors to the growth of this country.
If I could just add and have a positive twist to it, the tax burden that Tom is alluding to, we look at it as a tax revenue to GDP number. And it also speaks to how strong an economy is and how well their systems are to be able to collect taxes, because it shows that Kenya's compliance levels are also relatively high. When you look at Nigeria, for example, we, as part of our research role, we look at the whole of Africa. And just about a month ago when we were in Nigeria, what we saw is increasing difficulty in collecting tax because the compliance rate is just quite poor. But when you compare Kenya and its peers, it shows that what the discussions that we are having now, we need to increase compliance. But one of the ways in which we can see the increase in compliance manifesting is the tax revenues to GDP number. That's one of the ways in which we can measure how well the government is doing in terms of collection of its taxes. And that said, the burden is mainly also on the formal sector. Maybe we could look at ways in which we can widen that bracket, which has been an enigma, because it's been quite difficult to look at how well we can tax the informal sector, which is the bulk of the economy.
Yes.
So that's really something that KRA and the National Treasury would have to really look into to see how they can increase tax revenues from that front.
Okay. There's a very beautiful graphic there by the Business Daily, page 5. They're talking about budget growth over the last 5 years. So 2014-15, when I think after the first year of the Jubilee government, it was 1.8 trillion shillings, all right? 2015-16, it went up to 2.1 trillion. 16-17, 2.48 trillion. 2.62 trillion, 2017-18. And then 2018-19, the one that's coming to a close, 2.99 trillion. And then now 19-20, 3.02 trillion. So it's been growing, as you can see there. Then below it, there's the public debt, which has dominated the national dialogue as well. January 2009, and you see how it's grown over the years to what it is right now of 5.42 trillion shillings that we owe. Domestic and foreign debt as well. All right, so get your copy of the Business Daily and have a look at that this morning. The other story that's there, gentlemen and lady, Rotich faces quote taxpayer hurdles ahead of ambitious budget. Do you expect that out of what you will read, and especially ones that touch on taxes, will be challenged in court?
If last year was anything to go by, we saw the Robin Hood tax was challenged.
Exactly.
The housing levy still,
it's being
back and forth. In as much as maybe the fuel levy came through, half of it came through, it was also challenged. So if that is, anything to go by, and those were more unorthodox measures of tax raising, areas, then maybe we could also see a repeat this year.
Yeah. So the first paragraph there says Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich is once again expected to face an increasingly restless, citizenry and uncompromising courts as he strives to raise 3.1 trillion shillings for the year beginning July. The other story there is more pain awaits beer and tobacco consumers. Sin tax, so to speak. So it's going to increase for those of you who love to indulge. Tony.
It's normal for government always when they want to raise revenue, they'll go for such kind of a thing.
Exactly.
But they always get little revenue that you can plug in on your budget deficits. So we can't expect much that they will collect revenues.
Yeah, because if you increase it, reduce my alcohol consumption.
Yeah, you look at the number of people who take alcohol.
5 bottles,
yeah,
to
the
be
number
able
of
to
people.
use the same amount of money, I'll drink 3.
Yes, yeah. The number of people that you're targeting within that bracket is specific people.
Exactly.
And so you're burdening people, the same people every year. You're not increasing the tax net.
Okay.
And so that's the biggest problem with that.
The one that we mentioned earlier, we were talking about this in the break, also on page 5. MPs blow 25 billion hole in Treasury's budget plan. So this, of course, as a result of the discussions on the budgetary allocations, there were some figures that were raised by Parliament as well, and that really creates another difference of 25 billion shillings in the target and the plan. Then in that case, this is another headache for Rotich.
He's in trouble, I'd say, as the chief man at the Treasury. As our CS, we are looking up to him to fulfill what he has promised. His promise is coming and he needs to fulfill it. But look at the sluggish economy in which we are operating on. So this is expected, and I'm expecting this to continue. Yeah. And unfortunately, we might see more of supplementary budgets in the coming year.
Yeah. So the worry for most Kenyans is we collect this money and we plan for it, and we do very good policy papers and plans. Beautiful. And they gather dust somewhere. But the worry for most people is, and from a layman's point of view, is what we call wastage. I'd call it outright thievery, because we know corruption cases that exist within government, both levels, in fact. So for a common man who's sitting there and thinking, wow, 3.1 trillion shillings, quite ambitious, and it's going to go to this, it's going to go to this, the other one is to this. But there's wastage, pilferage that we are seeing across all levels. Tony.
The issue of wastage is an issue that many governments all over the world struggle with. It's not only Kenya itself. And so a number of studies show that we lose from corruption and wastage around half of the budget itself. And most of the wastage happens in Kenya in the national government itself, or the national government level. You find people with budget allocations of tea and bread and such kind of thing. You talk about people saying per diems are paid around 50,000 per day. You see the kind of wastage that we see in public, handling public money is one of the biggest problems that Kenya faces. Yeah. And so I think the problem in Kenya, we have very many laws in terms of curbing these things, but the implementation itself is always the biggest problem. Kenya has one of the strongest fiscal laws in terms of managing public money. But implementation and following it up is the problem. Yeah. There is too much impunity. You talk about the MPs itself. They put a housing allowance for themselves of around 250,000. When the Constitution is clear that who exactly makes the remuneration of state offices, which is the SRC.
Yes.
And so we have this impunity that people misuse public funds with the little consequences out of it. And that's the biggest problem that we have. In my opinion, that we read a very expensive budget, and the main thing that we are looking at in these things, in terms of target growth and all those kind of things, I think even at 2.5 trillion, we can deliver that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything to add about this issue of wastage?
Yeah,
beautiful word, really. Which
yes. I think we've talked at length around it. Just the fiscal slippages. If there's any way in which Kenya can be more prudent in terms of reducing that the fiscal slippages, which will also be wastage. And Tom talked about half of the budget could be lower, but whatever the number is, the fact is Kenya is suffering from this issue that has also grappled governments around the world, and looking at creative ways. We saw the president cutting down on travel at some point, so looking at more creative ways in which we can be able to deal with this wastage. Yes. And also giving praise to our journalists and the media to also whistleblow on some of these matters that are increasing the transparent, the transparency of the government, which is something that we also don't see in other African markets.
Sam?
Just to add on to what they've said, you'll realize that most of these government and parastatals and everything, we tend to spend most of our time in meetings discussing policies, as he says, but we have no time to implement them. This is a country which has a lot of potential, and the risk in in taking up whatever we need to do to grow the economy is much lower than what ripple effect we might have.
Yes.
But as he clearly said, we have created devolved government which operate like independent governments by themselves, and they can do whatever they want. No one controls what they are doing. And in my opinion, just to cut some of these wastages, governors and the CEC of finance must be held responsible for anything financial that happens at the government level. Mm-hmm. And our president is doing something. We need to give him benefit of doubt. Things have changed in this country in the last few months, mm-hmm. but let's hope it will continue. But as he said, impunity is at its top level. No one cares about the
Okay, I'm coming to you briefly for closing remarks this morning, but let's have a look at what some of our viewers are saying. Billy says the government should actually borrow from us the old currency without questioning where it was uprooted from. There's no way that's happening, Billy, just so you know. Just bank the money. If you have to explain where you got it from, please do. If it was, acquired in the right manner. Rogers Buluma says we aren't utilizing the little collected. Kindly let the more to be collected. Lest it ends up in someone's pocket. Yeah, worried, of course, about the wastage that we are talking about. Kirinyaga Finest says, how much did they allocate to the looters? 50% to 80% of that budget. Of course, going back to the worry that Kenyans really have about the issue of corruption and, doing all these ambitious budgets and figures only for them to be stolen by individuals, all right? So let's get closing remarks on your expectations this afternoon and on the statement itself, collection, and the ripple effect that will have on the economy. Let's start with you, Sam.
We need to strengthen our fiscal policy, which is very weak, mm-hmm. in terms of curbing unnecessary expenses, mm-hmm. and coming up with new ways of raising revenue, and also to try and ensure that we have a tracking system of what we budget for and what we spend. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, it might work in this case.
Okay.
I think the government faces an uphill task of looking at creative ways in which they can improve tax collection and also widen the tax net. Mm-hmm. So in the Business Daily, you'll see a story where Kenya is looking at ways in which they can maybe tax the digital market more, which has been an area of discussion not only in Kenya but other parts of the world, mm-hmm. because you have more of a village economy as the internet takes quite a huge chunk from the world trade. So when you look at also the trend in the public debt, we've seen an accelerated accumulation of public debt. And our hope is that this budget will be able to address some of those issues. We've already seen an increase in the fiscal deficit, but those are nominal numbers. We also like to compare it as a percentage of GDP. And the rightful GDP and not a ballooned GDP. Mm-hmm. But so far we've seen the fiscal deficit numbers narrow in a slow but steady way, definitely not hitting the targets that the government had mm-hmm. set in place up to financial year 2023. Mm-hmm. We think they're ambitious, but if they put in place revenue raising measures that are that are tangible and not ambitious revenue measures, then maybe they could get to where they want to go to.
Okay. Mine will be three things. First, we talk about public debt. We are struggling with public debt. Since the Jubilee government came in 2013, we've seen till today there is an increase of public debt to around 3 trillion. Mm-hmm. So is there anything that we can put tangibly that we say 3 trillion has gone into this kind of infrastructure projects and whatnot for that period? So when you look at the budget that is coming up, those are the main things and the questions that Kenyans maybe should ask. Looking at also the budget itself, we see a growth on the Business Daily. Every year there is a continued growth, mm-hmm. expansionary budget. But the question will be, are incomes of Kenyans increasing at that rate? because we keep increasing your budget, but incomes are remaining the same. So the burden continues being heavy on the Kenyan. And the last thing would be, I think today is just a PR exercise, this budget policy statement. So it doesn't give much. The meat of it will come in the finance bill. If you remember last year, we were surprised with they mentioned about the housing levy, but the structure itself came within the finance bill. So that is where, which comes later, not November, May, I think on August there. That's where the biggest issue comes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva Otieno, who's an economist with Stanchart Bank, talking to us about the issues of the budget this morning. Sam Mwaura is a tax expert at Grant Thornton as well, and Tony Watima, a resident analyst and an economist who also writes for the Business Daily on issues regarding business. Get your copy of the Business Daily this morning because it has a very good analysis of what this is about, what the expectations are, and with very good graphics and numbers and data journalism as well. Also, the Daily Nation this morning talking about how that money will be shared. The 3.1 trillion shillings budget will be shared across all the expenditure avenues, and especially regarding the national government, which is expected to receive 1.8 trillion, judiciary 18 billion, parliament 43 billion shillings, counties 371 billion, consolidated fund at 805 billion shillings as well. Thank you so much for making time for us on AM Live. Like I said, I was standing in for Dibala Lainea, who is away, but he'll be back sooner than you know. Thank you so much for your time. And NTV's coverage of this budget day continues with NTV Today coming up in an hour or so as well, with our top anchors and analysts as well to talk about this going through the day until the budget is read, and post analysis as well on that. Thank you so much. Do have a lovely day. My name is Edmond Nyabola. Bye-bye.